Episode 219 Above Ground Podcast, Shades of Gray.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Coming at you live with real conversations about mental health from the peer perspective, it's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now your hosts, TPP and Will Foley. Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode 219 of Above Ground Podcast.
Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below.
Oh, you know who that is. You down with TPP. Don't ever underestimate the power of TPP.
It's good to be back in the studio.
Yes, it's good to be in Hallam Halls.
Good to be in
Hallam Halls of the mountain.
Nice. As soon as you said that, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, every time I think of halls, that's the first thing I think of is Chris Oliva. Great. Sabotage. Yes. So yeah, we're back. We're back. Talking about an interesting topic that Timmy dropped in our show notes note that we take for episode ideas. And it was about, are we looking at things through the wise mind or through the lens of trauma? And there was another point that was underneath that says, at what point do you stop blaming others and own your part in this thing called your life? And I kind of, as we were talking about this, I kind of said, I think personally that the two are linked. And I actually said that the two are linked because if you're looking through the wise mind, in my humble opinion, I don't think you can blame. Because in the wise mind, you would see that it's not really, there's blame for everything to go around, but it's your responsibility for cleaning up your feelings about it. So if you can look at it through the wise mind, in the wise mind, you're not going to blame. You're going to look at it in the education parcel that it is for you in your journey, I think.
No, I fully agree with that, actually.
But I think getting to that point is the staircase that is sometimes hard and riddled with nails and dust and bugs and and bad carpet and paint that shouldn't be there and
paint.
Just, you know.
Yeah, I think the kind of like for me, it always kind of helps like paint a picture as balance. So like there's always that there's always those two circles. So and then in when the two circles meet is the wise mind. So you got the reasonable mind, and then you have emotional mind. And then the center of those two where they meet is wise mind. So to me, I'm always like, that's like the middle ground, right? That's the balance.
Of having partial,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
a little bit of both.
Yeah, ideally, that's what you want is.
And and that makes total sense because you can't have one without the other. Because you need them both. You really can't. I mean, they're the poles. Like, you can't ever get rid of the poles. It's being in the middle of the poles. Just like we are in society right now. We're so far out on these ridiculous poles,
right,
that we can't. Right. We're so far out we can't even see the middle anymore because we don't know where it is. Unless you're looking through the wise mind, you ain't gonna find the middle.
Right. It's a mix. So like the reasonable mind is going to be more more ruled by like facts and logic and reason,
reality.
Know? And then emotional mind is going to be more like ruled by your moods and your feelings and urges, and where facts may not mean anything to that, to those things. So then if you get the combination of them, you know what I mean? You're kind of taking both and bringing the left brain and the right brain together. And
are you saying that trauma is linked to that mindset? And
I mean,
am I understanding you correctly?
I think
in
so.
that?
I mean, as we always say,
because it just seemed to make that correlation.
This is the peer perspective, so yes.
Okay.
I think so because, and as you were saying in the intro, it's like it's gonna the trauma is going to affect these things, you know?
Sure, because the reasonable mind can't see the same thing that the emotional mind can't. Just like
Correct.
the emotional mind can't see the same
reason.
thing the reasonable mind can't, because they're out on the separate poles.
So if you're in the grips of the emotional mind, say, and someone's trying to calm you down and you're like trying to speak logic, like, you know that. You can't, it's like
Yeah, you can't.
talking to a toddler when they're, you know what I mean? Like escalated. You just, your words are going to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, and they come out all. And I've steadily been trying to just keep my mouth shut more. Like I've been trying to make a practice of this, and I did this afternoon a little bit just because I'm like, fuck, I really talk over people and shit sometimes. And it's always but it's also because I know why. Because I had to fight for my voice to be heard for so long, and
Right,
I
I don't
felt
think
that
you're
way.
doing
So
it with like harmful intentions, and
No,
it's not
but-
always a negative, you know, unhelpful thing.
no, it's not, but it can be.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to validate somebody, it can be.
I mean, you know, being heard is a big thing for a lot of people, you know. You can just, even if you don't really say anything to go, hey, like a full validation statement, like, you know, hey, I'm sorry you're feeling X, and you know, is there anything I can do? Or, you know, sometimes even just a, yeah, I get it. You know, sometimes even that's like, you know.
Yeah, I actually stopped saying I get it. Because to be honest with you, I don't get it. I can't get somebody. I'm not in their shoes.
Right.
I can get parts.
I got
and
you.
And somebody actually like opened my eyes to that insight. Like it wasn't like that's something that nobody told me that. Like that's something that somebody kind of pointed out in a conversation, but it wasn't pointed out towards me. It was just like a statement about how to, and I was like, oh, that's kind of true. So I've been trying to adopt that a little bit, but
Yeah, I don't think that's, I mean, you know, also too, it's like you can't ever say anything that's going to be perfect. Like someone's going to be offended
No.
by your words. So it's like, you know, if you kind of state your intention, they should go, yeah. I mean, you know, trauma in general, like trauma's not, like nothing really is black and white. So, you know, my trauma is going to be different from your trauma, but I could say like, yeah, I can understand that. You know?
Yeah, I actually started saying I'm sorry a little bit more and just saying, you know what, I don't have anything more than that. Because there's nothing I can say to you. Because I actually had this conversation with a friend of the show the other day on Facebook Messenger. Our friend Tyler Michelle, who we'll just give a shout out to in case she's listening to this episode. Or they are listening to this episode. Sorry, proper pronouns. And no disrespect to them at all. The thing is that the other day I happened to see them driving through Albany, and I happened to be stopped at a light, and I was like, I think I know that person. So I reached out and said, hey, did I see you driving through Albany?
Oh, okay, cool.
And they said yes. And then they went on a little bit of a rant just about everything that was going on, because I asked how they were doing, and they were not doing very well, but that's all I said was, I'm sorry, and that's all I've got. Because there's nothing I can say to what they're going through, because
Sure.
I can't get all of that. And but I'm there to
No,
listen.
I think that's good, and I think maybe I'm wrong, but the way I see it too is I think there could be like levels to this. Like if it's somebody like on the street, which I'm not saying like, you know, you're not friends with this person, but like if there's somebody like on the street, you can kind of go like, you know, take it like at a surface more, you know what I mean? But like say with if you and I were talking, like maybe if you came to me, I would feel comfortable saying like, I don't do this, but it would probably be a good idea if I did. Like, all right, well, do you want me to listen? Do you want advice? Like, what do you want from me for this conversation?
Actually, dude, that's a really cool thing. I never ever thought about that.
That's what I mean. Like, I don't think of it, but it would be...
I very rarely want advice. I most of the time just want somebody to listen or just let me hear myself. Because I've learned this. Yes, because that's what I've really learned the most from is hearing myself put it together. Because again, I don't like tough love works to a certain point and until it doesn't, because I shut it off.
I mean, advice isn't necessarily tough love either.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't want advice most of the time. If I want advice, I'll elicit that advice. Because I've had too many people offering me advice my entire life that I didn't listen to. And some of that I should have. And I'm paying for that now, like in life, as I'm trying to figure out my future. And I'm learning that there's things that I'm going to need to do, and I'm going to have to change a bunch of stuff to do
But on the other
those
side of
things.
the coin, though, like what you do is, I think, is equally as cool. Like, right off the rip, like, if I don't ask for advice, don't give it. Like, that's fine. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because that's helpful to you, so that's fine.
Yeah, I
get it.
You know, because I'm guilty of that. Like, I'm guilty of the fix.
We're human. I know.
But as empathetic people in doing this, you kind of.
But also,
that's kind of really
going back to what we were talking about as the intro is our past experiences led us to that. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
If you were a child and you were kind of stuck alone, no one listening to you, maybe you had to figure some things out on your own. You know what I mean? Or maybe you were just never heard by anybody, and now you have a little bit of a telephone book to stand on, and now you want to, you know, that's not a short joke for Will, but
yeah, it was. That was funny though. But I do. You know what this has given me though? It has given me a big goddamn mouth. Because that I can tell you.
I've always had a big mouth.
Yeah, I always had a big mouth, but that lack of being heard made me louder.
I got you.
But I've realized though that my loudness sometimes is a defense mechanism.
Sure.
A lot of times it is a defense mechanism.
And going back, are we looking at things through that lens?
Right. But it is a defense mechanism.
Right.
So, but I don't always catch myself.
That's okay.
And there are people that, obviously, the people that are close to me are the ones that bring it out of me, which is tough too because.
Why do you think that is? And it's not specific to you because with me too.
Well, but it's. I'm sure it is between us.
I'm not saying you and I.
But I'm saying it is between you and I also because we have this partnership,
right.
And we're not going to see everything the same way,
sure.
And we don't communicate the same way,
sure.
And we don't communicate well, and I mean, we talked about that on the way in the door, and I mean, people like hearing that shit because it's real. Like this is, I mean, dude, this is fucking real life. This isn't like
I know.
Like I'm sitting in a basement studio with two really cool people, and like this is not fucking YouTube. This isn't like Fantasy Island with tattoos.
We didn't drive our Corvettes here.
Yeah, we didn't drive our rented Corvettes,
and our producer's not going to take this home and
right, edit the shit out of it and put in
the
old Batman edits.
But I think it connects to that though. It's it's a defense mechanism.
It is a defense mechanism,
but that defense mechanism is from some sort of trauma.
Well, absolutely, and it's certain. But again, these things like this is what I don't like about the rap of bad coping skills is because there's a certain point where a bad coping skill was actually a good coping skill.
Oh yeah.
It's where it got off track somewhere that it became a negative coping skill. But what I don't like is when, because I just heard this recently, and somebody had mentioned this to me that their need for assistance in one particular area was not being addressed at all. Now, granted, the person that she was telling this to was supposed to listen to this, was the therapist. And the therapist said, well, I don't do any of those things. We need to work on coping skills. And this person said, you don't fucking understand. Deep breathing and meditation is not going to get me through homelessness. Like, I can deep breathe all I want.
Right.
So coping strategies are great. But they're only as good as they're.
You have to be at a certain. Yeah,
you have to be at a certain level.
If you're homeless, if you're in extreme,
if you've been
living
crisis,
in survival mode,
right.
Crisis, none of that shit's good. It's going back to, like I said, you're talking to a toddler.
But this is the point, though, that like people like get into these boxes and we get into these boxes and we have these roles to fill, and we're not seeing the person for the person.
I know.
So we're not looking through we think we're looking through the wise mind all the time.
I'm actually kind of like taken back a bit that a therapist kind of that was the response, but
yeah.
But we love therapists, nothing wrong, but
yeah, and I say therapist as I don't know there's no proper terminology. These are kind of culminations of stories that I hear all the time because to tell you the truth, the system is not that great, man. It just isn't. But there's people out there like me, like us doing this podcast that work in this shit that are trying to do the best we can within a very narrowing line of shit,
going back to what you said earlier. Like, you can be a therapist, but you know what? before you're a therapist, you're still human. You
gotta be a
and
human
before
being.
you're, not before you're human, but you're human. So you may have had some of these T's in your life. You
Right.
know what I mean? So therefore, just because you're a therapist doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. Doesn't mean you're going to have all the answers, and it doesn't mean you're going to. Again, you're human. It doesn't mean you're going to. Maybe the therapist kind of went back at night and was like, maybe I could have handled that better.
Well, I was just about to say, what bothered me the most about it is that, unfortunately, I didn't hear the real conversation, but the fact that the offer was never made to connect this person to any other services because this person was not what they normally consider in that service area.
Not the typical
client of that particular establishment, which has nothing, should have nothing to do with anything. You would think it would be better actually if you were, you know what I mean? But
yeah,
but
again,
that's the thing.
We don't have these skills, and I've recently talked to someone who went through, the master's and the doctorate, and they told me that there were certain things that they didn't learn and they didn't even touch on them. And you'd be surprised.
I'm
You'd be
sure.
Like, what the heck?
I know, because I see the cracks in the education now.
So
But-
it's like it's.
But
I can only rise to the level of my education.
But here's the thing, though. You can't burn something completely down without fixing it. Because the thing is there's nothing better. Because again, like psychology, like, dude, I mean, in reality, we already know all the theories. There's no new, like the theories that are coming out, yes, maybe they're based on some different knowledge, but they're still all based on Freudian, Jungian.
Right.
There's no new stuff, just like there's no new drugs.
I think this is just me. I'll probably get shit, but I always have the unpopular opinion. I think a lot of this new stuff and a lot of the new terms are just people trying to get their name out and doing something that, like, hey, it's different. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not being noticed because, you know what? I'm not saying these fun new terms that are different because I know at the end of the day, it's these things that we talk about.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, it depends on depends on what terms we're talking about, but like the thing is that you've got so many compartmentalized stuff and there's so many negatives out there that it's hard to fix anything because there's so much broken. Like, that's what you find.
But you're also
you're
dealing with broken people, and I hate to say broken, but you're dealing with people.
Some people have it harder than others.
Let's say this: you have unregulated people dealing with and trying to fix an unregulated system.
That's true. You got a lot of unregulated people trying to fix an unregulated system.
Like, if you look at it that way, you go, okay, so it's like, I can tell a fish to climb a tree, but at the end of the day, and then at the end of the day, should I get mad at the fish and say you're not a success?
Well, the fish, that's a stretch with our brains because we are the most computerized beings there is, man. We have the power. We just don't use it.
Well,
and that's not an excuse.
It's not an excuse, but if you
because it sounds like
an
excuse. No, I think because again, you do know there's enough evidence out there to prove anything you want. All you got to do is click a button, and I guarantee you, if people wanted to find real information, they could find it if they wanted to look hard enough. They want to be in their bubbles. They want to be supported by their views all the time. And I've learned that about myself too, which is why I've gotten away from a lot of that shit because that's the problem. The thing is nothing human is black and white. It's all gray.
Right.
Everything is gray.
Right.
We just make things black and white.
It's all shades of gray.
It's all shades of gray, exactly. And that's the thing. And we don't even acknowledge that because we want to write the law by the black and white, but then none of us are on the black and white. We're all in the gray. So we build these walls and trenches and put up barriers to everything.
Yeah, I think that it could be like a cultural thing. I think a lot of us learned that way, that things are like black and white. It takes you a long. For me, it took me a long time. Like you've said it before. Like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. It's kind of like that. Right. Like you learn things, and I'm like, you know what? There's, like, in my experience and in my my reading and journaling and finding stuff out and educating myself on these things, there's very few truths. You know what I mean? Like, they're solid truths. They're out there, but at the same time, it's like, okay, again, if you have anxiety, let's take this anxiety medication. Well, this anxiety can help, and it probably has helped people, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you. And at the same time, maybe what you don't need breathing techniques, you don't need yoga, but maybe what you need is something different, right? It's the same thing.
Right, exactly.
Like, these things work. I'm not saying they don't work, but I'm just saying it's not across the board, black and white, where this is what's going to work for you.
Right. And again, I kind of want to come back to that because you hit it with the thing about the more I learn, the less I know, right? I don't know if it's, I was thinking about this as you said it. Maybe it's not the less I know. Maybe it's the more I question. And maybe it's the more you question.
Right.
And I think that's where you start to bring, because the thing is this. My emotional mind saved my ass way more times than my fucking analytical mind ever would have from youth through young adult.
Right.
There's no doubt about it, okay? Because if it wasn't for my emotions and my defense mechanisms, who knows what the fuck would have happened to me.
Right.
So that got me through. The problem is that all the evidence that I was getting hand-fed to me by the universe that I wasn't paying attention to, because we've had numerous conversations. All of this stuff that we talk about has been in my universe for years. Buddhism, all of that stuff has been circulating throughout since at least I hit like 20s when I first started hearing about like Jim Rohn and like
Right.
self-development, Tony Robbins, like, but I didn't pay any attention to it in my 20s because I kept thinking
know
scheme. No, I kept thinking scheme. I was feeling like I was still angry. And I still felt really taken advantage of, and I shouldn't have. Like, I realize now at 51 that a lot of the feelings I had were a lot of them were misinterpreted by myself, and a lot of them were misrepresented. And it's
Nice.
hard because
That's a good one.
Well, you learn, and you can't know this at 25 because your 25-year-old brain is different.
Oh, yeah.
It's just got developed, if it's even fully developed at that point. So you don't. There's things that you cannot learn without age, and wisdom comes with age. You can have wisdom that's different at 25, but I guarantee you that 25-year-old wisdom will change when you're 50.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm not shortchanging any youth, because I think there's knowledge everywhere.
If I asked you 10 years ago, what do you think you need in life, and wrote it down, and then now today I'm going to ask you, what do you think you need in life? They're going to be two different things.
Yeah, a lot of things would be different. There's a lot of things that I thought I needed
Right.
that I don't really need.
Which is,
And
I think that's great. Like, to me, that's like wisdom.
I'm trying to shed as much as I can, and it's been hard because, well, like we were talking about, the Jungian theory about how we revert to youth in adulthood to kind of heal our youth. As I've had conversations recently with someone who's really into Jung, and I realized that because I got a skateboard. I've been like looking at baseball cards again. Like, I'm watching wrestling on Peacock. Like, I watched SummerSlam. Like, I was home Saturday night to watch SummerSlam.
Will's practicing the
Like,
DDT.
Yeah, dude, no DDT. Superfly, Jimmy Snuka.
Superfly, baby.
Dude, splash off the top rope. Hell yeah, that's the move of power right there. But yeah, but you go back to there and to heal things. So, it's.
But, I want to kind of go back to what you were saying, like how your emotional mind kind of kept you alive at certain points.
And then it gets off track. Because remember how we were talking earlier about.
Right, but at the same time, though, like you said earlier, like, you can't have one without the other. So you had to experience that emotional mind. And maybe it served you until it didn't. But now, with bringing in some of the more logic side of things, you could say, well, that the emotional mind did this or did this, and I learned that. But now I can look at it more analytically and kind of, erase what I don't need or figure out what worked and what doesn't. anymore, and which can bring you closer to the wise mind because you're kind of enmeshing or whatever, the two of them.
Well, I'm integrating them both. And the integration part of it, and you just brought up a really cool point because I was thinking about this, is that my analytical mind was still there as a youth.
Oh, sure.
Because I was doing things like as a kid to keep myself busy. Dude, I would watch every wrestling card there was, and I would write every arena
really?
and VFW
you
down.
You were really into wrestling. I never knew that.
Well, it wasn't for that. It was because in my mind I had a fictitious band, and I would make up names and write out tours and look at the map and then get up with my tennis racket when I was like 9.
Right, there
Dude,
you go.
You know what I mean?
Tennis racket.
Yeah,
we had a wooden oar like for a
Oh,
boat.
yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a tennis racket that was the perfect size. I put a rope around it for a strap. I used to spin it around.
Yeah.
I used to save used to cut up old pajamas to make stage clothes. And then,
Killer.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but that's the power of youth though, man. That's what
Right.
sets
I guess maybe I don't know, I just came up with this question as we're talking this. How do we I guess figure out which lens we are looking through? How do we decipher? Are we looking at this through the lens of trauma? Are my insecurities a hoax that was implanted somewhere, or is this?
I guess the first thing is to ask yourself those questions. Because you got to start.
You got to start.
And how else do you start? I guess you start with those two questions. Am I looking at this through, and maybe you don't use those terms. Am I looking at this as a kid, or am I looking at this as a grown up? Because in reality, that's kind of where we're going with this, at least for me, because a lot of the things we told the stories to ourselves as youth.
Oh, yeah.
So it's really about switching those stories. So is it meshing the two of them is bringing back the self. So is the self in the center of that? Between the wise mind and the emotional mind is the self.
Is that the authentic self? Maybe?
Is that the authentic self? And I don't know if that's original for me thinking that, or if I don't honestly know. So I'm going to throw that out to the universe.
It's a great thought. Because you could take experiences from both.
Right, because everything's shades of gray. So the self is shades of gray.
I was going to say that, yes.
That's all it is, man. The self is shades of gray. It's just one shadow of gray. And that's why and you see the proof of it every time the sun's behind you. Sometimes it's darker, sometimes it's not. It's like we're all just
to ponder, man. I like that.
Is it? I don't know. Maybe we just left another episode out there to decipher.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. It's a great question, and I guess one to be talked about, one to ponder.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, that's one to ponder. That might be one to sit on a boat and cast a line out to.
Yeah,
I've been talking about fishing a lot lately, and I've never fished in my life.
We talked about that like a couple episodes ago.
And I mentioned it to somebody the other day too.
Maybe you need to go fishing. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe I need to learn how to fish. I've had some people ask me to take them fishing at points, but I'm like, dude, I've never fished in my life. I don't have any fishing gear. It's not. It's not like I can get fishing gear. It's not like we've got that lying around.
Yeah, I don't have anything. I used to as a kid. I mean, we would ride our BMX bikes over to this little pond, and just sit on the edge and.
Oh, yeah?
You don't know what you're doing, but sometimes you catch like a sunfish or something like that. And as a little kid, it's a pretty cool experience.
Were you close enough to ride down to the reserve?
We
when
did
you got
that
older,
when we were older. Yeah, but when we were younger, there was an apartment complex, and they had this little. They must have stocked it. Now that I look back on it.
Okay, yeah. All right.
It was just like a little thing, and they had a fountain. I mean, it was big, but it wasn't like. But anyways, so they had, they had to have stocked it. Now that I think about it, but they had. It was just like a little area. You know what I mean? To kind of landscape the area, make it look pretty and whatever. And you know what I mean? So that's what we did. We went there and fished, and I don't know. That was a long time ago. My memory's not the greatest, but I do remember that. I remember I sat on a bee's nest too, or something like that, a wasp or something in the ground. Yeah, that sucked. And then I had to ride my bike home.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
I sat on a wasp once it was in the house.
Really?
It was under the bird cage, and I went to go clean under the bird cage, and I slipped, and I'm right down on it. That fucking thing stung me right in the ass. Oh, it
No
hurt.
kidding.
Yeah, fucker.
Dude. Yeah. I don't know. So I guess lens of trauma, lens of wise mind, lens of rational mind, lens of where are you? You know?
Yeah, whatever you call it. I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it. If you call it, if you're looking through the youth, I mean, obviously,
I think questioning it is definitely,
that's the important part.
Yeah,
is
I think,
to question it.
just to question it and say, hey, is this, what am I feeling? Or what am I thinking that I'm feeling? And then from there, say, why am I feeling this? And try to take reality for what it is and look at the facts. If you're holding on to like old patterns, or if you're thinking of an outcome that you might be wishing or something like that, you're not sticking to the reality. You're kind of, I don't know, I hate to use the word daydreaming, but I can't think of anything else right now. But like you're kind of daydreaming, and that might lead you astray.
Yeah, look at the stories you're telling yourself, but look at the stories you've told yourself in the past also. Because the stories you tell yourself now about a situation are going to be much different than they were in the original situation. So I would offer this little bit of fortune cookie to say that if you're going to look at anything through the self and through through the mind and stuff, you got to ask yourself on both ends of that. Like, if you're triggered by something, which is kind of what we're talking about in the situation, ask yourself, like Timmy said, like, why are you feeling this way? What caused... First of all, you got to know what the trigger is, but then you have to look back. You have to do the archaeology dig, man.
Yeah,
You got to start looking back, which is tough. But I guarantee you, the first thing that pops into your mind, and this is by experience, usually the first thing that you think about, if it's supposed to come out, dude, it's going to come out, and you're going to hit it as soon as that trigger hits. You're going to know it. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, that's where the work begins, because unless you acknowledge it, you can't fix it.
Right.
Because, again, you can listen to the ping in the car, but until you acknowledge it and say, I got to take it to the garage, it's not going to get fixed.
You pinpointed the noise, but now what, right?
Yeah. There's always another step.
Well, we've always talked about, like, you can't just go out and be like, oh, I want to be healed, or, oh, I read this book and now everything should be okay. Like, you know what I mean? You have to do you can't like, you don't see like professional athletes go to the gym once a week and go, hey, you know what? That's enough. Like, I went today for 2 hours. Like, that's good. Like, no,
right.
It's their lifestyle.
Right. It's their lifestyle. And there's no book that tells you.
No,
Sorry.
No, and I think
that's every book.
I think maybe learning it by yourself, it might stick. You know what I mean? Sometimes, like you said, people told you some things in the past that could have been helpful, but we're just not. When we're not ready, we're not ready.
Right.
When we're ready, we're more open to hearing it, and that's when we can go, okay, like. And you know what? Even though you can look back on it and maybe think of some of those things and go, I was told this, and like, man, that would have been great if I kind of stuck with that and followed that. So that you can use that as like insight a little bit and go, and then take what you know now and see what worked. And
sure, because the thing that you develop now may be better than the thing you could have developed then.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of that too. Like, but it all comes down to acknowledge the things that you need to acknowledge, no matter how hard they are, because you know what? Trying to outrun them is going to wear you out, and there will never be an outcome. You need to acknowledge the pain, the problems, the disconnect, the loss of hope, the loss of inspiration, the loss of the relationship.
Like you said, I think
grief. You have to grieve, and then you have to rebuild.
And you can follow those. You can follow the grief and the pain.
That's right. To your answers.
It'll lead you to the answers most times. You know?
It's going to lead you to the gold, man, and the dig.
Right. It'll lead you to that spot in the body, maybe, that you can go, okay, well, maybe this is why I'm having some pain here, or this is where I feel it, you know. Sometimes people get embarrassed and they feel it in certain ways, or their face gets hot or something. You know, same thing. It's like, pay attention to these signs, you know.
Yeah.
The body's pretty amazing, and it will try and nudge you as much as possible to lead you in the right direction. You know?
And it will if you listen. But you got to listen.
Yeah, you got to be open, I think, too. Because you can listen, but if you're not open...
Well, yeah, openness is...
You know what I mean? Because we've talked about this many times. It's like, this just happened to me in my life. It's like, you can ask the universe for things, and sometimes you don't see them, or sometimes you may not have been specific enough. You know, you're like, okay, so now I have this thing, but then there's not attachments, but there's environments to this thing that may not go well. And then you're like, wait a minute, like I wasn't specific enough. Like I just asked this thing and put it out there and it shows up and you're like, but it's not really in the space that I wanted or something like that. And so... Will's laughing over here, so maybe that's a sign.
Yeah, it is a sign. It's funny.
But you guys know the drill. You know,
He's in my head.
Follow us on Facebook, all the socials, Instagram. Shoot us a message, abovegroundpodcast@gmail.
Yeah, dude. Instagram, okay?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Facebook is fine, but Instagram it. Like, that's where we're most active on Instagram.
That's where I usually go on Instagram.
And YouTube. Check out the podcast on YouTube, whether or not you want to just re-listen. Just if you're at work and you need something to listen to, go to YouTube and check out Above Ground Podcast. All the episodes are on YouTube. It's still the audio, so you don't have to worry about keeping your screen open.
Spotify, Apple,
Google, Amazon, Audible,
Nippertown.
Yep, Nippertown.
Pretty much wherever you pod, you know, and just appreciate everybody that does listen. Will and I were talking on the way over here and talking about the other side of this is like seeing some of the numbers and downloads and stuff. So it's pretty cool to know that we do have some listeners out there, and we're grateful for each and every one of you.
Absolutely. And with that, get well.
Be safe.
Stay
above. Thank you for giving us a listen. New episodes every Wednesday. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can share, rate, review, and even subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Other ways to support the show: follow us on social media, share the content, share our episodes. You can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/abovegroundpod. For further concerns, show ideas, or just to say hi, you can email us at abovegroundpodcast@gmail. Once again, thank you for listening and supporting mental health. Keep the conversation going and stay above.